All right, count us in.
Uh, we'll do it live, okay? We'll do it
Yeah.
live. I'm Andy Luke,
I'm PJ Hart.
and tonight we are reading Discworld, specifically The Fifth Element, published
Uh,
by Doubleday in
str
1999.
got it wrong straight away. I was inevitable. I said I do it all the time as well. You said the fifth element.
Did I?
Yeah. I constantly do that as well. Um,
Jean-Luc Besson's Fifth Elephant.
that's the one. So proudly displayed there on the cover of your softback edition. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I had to do a fact check there. Please continue.
Um, yeah, so every month we read a Discworld book. PJ for the multiple time, usually me for the first time. And PJ, you were saying just a moment before we came on air that you didn't like this first time you read it, but now you love it and you've loads of things to say about it tonight.
Yep. So if that's what you were waiting to find out, then you can tune out now.
All right.
uh,
Next one.
see you next month. Um, yes, broadly speaking, that is a fair characterization. I would say I was disappointed with it the first time I read it, probably because I read it when I was too young. Like for me, I think this is the Discworld book where it starts to feel a bit more grown up. It's a book about politics, but it's also the book. We're skipping right to the end here, but it's the book where Vimes finds out he's going to be a father. It's got the first iteration. I'm trying to be careful of spoilers here for Andy, but it's the kind of first introduction to the system of the Clacks, like the semaphore communication medium, which I think I just completely failed to visualize the first time I read it when I was a kid. I was like, I don't think maybe I was only vaguely aware probably of what semaphore actually is. So I found all the stuff with the clacks really, really hard to visualize the first time I read it. But hopefully it's not too much of a spoiler to say that, this is an idea that he returns to. This is a technology that now exists in Discworld and is kind of here to stay. So in later books, I kind of got my head around it, and it's used to great effect in other stories as well. So kind of coming back and reading this with kind of a fuller kind of understanding of like of how that actually works, and also just kind of like being a grown up and being better at reading books now, I guess. Yeah, I found there was a lot to like. I think I just didn't want like a book about vampire politics. Um,
That looks like school, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I've touched on it before. I was very deep into like the Anne Rice kind of vampire stuff. So like I sort of felt that this book was kind of making all that stuff that I thought was quite cool and sexy and mysterious, like a bit banal and a bit boring, but that's the point, like that's the joke. And I didn't appreciate that kind of to the full extent the first time I read this. Now I totally get it, and the fact that monsters are more like monsters when they act like people is like that's a great theme, and it's really well observed, and it's a great seam to mind for story, and it just totally went over my head when I was 13 or 14 or whatever.
For new readers like myself, the sort of industrial revolution of Discworld has been alluded to a few times here and
Hmm.
probably elsewhere. And I think it really comes in full swing with the Clacks from the outset. And there's also a lot of there's a few parallels to be had with the monstering element and the previous book, Carpe Jugulum,
Mm.
in terms of like Wolf figures a very real dangerous top tier villain as much as the vampire last time. For me, it felt very much like Carpe Jugular was the book I was constantly looking forward to getting to to get away from my shit life because things have been shit. With Fifth Elephant, it has been more the one that's sort of sustained me and helped me cope. Um, I read this in under 11 days.
Oh wow, yeah.
I don't think I've read a Discworld book just so quick before, and it's quite. I think it's maybe the biggest page count we've had so far. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a biggie. I was slow to start, but then I read the final 35% in a day. Because I had time and I got to that kind of that last act or whatever, and I was like, oh yeah, I started to remember how this goes. I was like, I think I vaguely remember there's good bits coming, but the bits that I did actually kind of like the first time around, where there's like a chase and all the fights and stuff at the end. Like I think I was just waiting too long, or I was too impatient to get to that stuff. Probably the first time I read it.
My edition is the Corgi edition, to published 2000, and it's got 460 pages.
I
Um,
vaguely remember reading the hardback version of this, so which I didn't own, so I must have got it at the library. So that means I probably didn't read it as soon as it came out. What date is on the on
I've got
on that print? Oh, you've got it in the notes.
1999
99.
to 2000.
Yeah, so I would be surprised if I read it any later than 2000 actually. Maybe I did buy the hardcover.
With rushing through it so quickly, there's actually been a few weeks have elapsed from me reading it and us broadcasting. So I'm glad PJ's really wanting to talk loads about it because I'm a little bit rusty, and just bear with me as the gears begin to
Yeah, and that's totally my
wax
fault
gears
for
begin to work.
yeah, for dragging my feet. But as I say, I read quite a significant chunk of the book in one go, and that was only a few days ago. So yeah, that was a real kind of change of perspective, I guess, from how I first approached it. Although it made me slightly wary to start it because I sort of had the opposite experience with Carpe Jugulum, which I liked. I really liked the first time, and then possibly my expectations were a little bit too high going into the reread of it because I don't think I had reread it at all since the first time. And I was kind of coming into this the opposite. I was going, oh yeah, I remember not super loving this the first time around, and it's more Uberwald stuff, and then I was a little bit maybe slightly underwhelmed by that last time around. But then, as I say, once I got kind of properly into it, I was like, yeah, it was just too much for me. There's stuff in there that I found it really, really hard to get my head around when I was a kid. Also, the whole business with the fat deposits and like the fifth elephant being like this great mineral resource, and like the bones are diamonds, and there's this fat that can be mined, and it's like treated like it's oil basically. I just found all that stuff maybe a little bit too weird and like, as I say, a little bit grown up and a little bit dusty, and it's all about like yeah the price of a candle and all this kind of stuff. Just like I just want Vimes to fight werewolves. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to have to wait to page 400 for that to happen. But I thoroughly enjoyed all the politics and Vimes. Oh yeah, another last thing. I'm just getting all my original teenage complaints out of the way first, and then we don't have to talk about them anymore. I also remember in this book being kind of disappointed that this was the direction that Vimes was continuing to go. Basically, was that he was continuing to get promoted up the nobility, and now he's a duke and he's an ambassador. And then at the end of the book, we discover that he's going to have a child. So it sort of felt to me that the kind of like the version of Vimes from Guards, who's like street level kind of scrappy hero kind of guy. I sort of felt that that version of him was disappearing, and that was the version that I first fell in love with. But now coming back to it as an adult and like having gone through many of life's changes myself, I find Vimes to be, if anything, even more relatable. You know, this version of Vimes who like he's getting a little bit past it and is about to face down the terror of fatherhood and all that stuff. I'm totally here for this version of Vimes now.
So just looking at my book list there, and the last time we saw Sam Vimes was in Jingo, where he was an overseas mission with semblances of ambassadorial, captain of the army, kind of level stuff. Yeah, I was a little bit surprised to see it go that way as well, but I think it adds to the maturity of the character, and um, like he is this scrappy cop, like you say, but he's been pivoted. He's been pushed and pulled by veterinary to go into these sort of yeah, great stately roles, and that in and of itself is is pretty interesting. I did find myself asking why Vimes. I harbored a suggestion maybe veterinary is training him to be a replacement for himself when the day comes. Because Vimes is the man most or least likely to be in that position. So it was really interesting, but it's certainly a power play thing that's of interest too.
Yeah, their relationship's great, and obviously not going to say anything now about what may or may not happen in future books. But yeah, I suppose it is kind of unfair actually, considering like how much I love Jingo. Like it's not like you pointed out there. This actually isn't a million miles away from Jingo in terms of like it's Vimes in a different kind of country in a fish out of water thing, basically being manipulated by veterinary. Yeah, to go to a different country and kind of mess around until the right outcome is achieved and kind of disrupt things. But I guess I don't know. Yeah, just the references and stuff in Jingo, I would have been more familiar with at the time, and it's just a bit more straightforward. Like there's definitely a lot more world building going on here, both for Uberwald and for the disc as a whole. And yeah, I just didn't all quite. It just all went a little bit over my head at the time, but as I said, thoroughly enjoyed it this time. So I've said that three times now. So let's actually
And
let's get into some detail.
yeah. Um, I'll kick off with the first synopsis. The Duke of Ankh sets off on a diplomatic mission to Bunk. The Watch under Carrot investigates the theft of a replica Stone of Scone and the murder of Wallace Sonky. Angua goes missing and Leonard makes coffee, among other things. That's me leaving a lot out in that synopsis.
That's one of your more
No way
succinct
that's
ones.
90 pages of.
Yeah, this must be. And again, I apologize for never volunteering to do these. But you've got your work cut out for you this time because it's a long book. Uh, yeah, I think okay. Something to touch on straight up as well. Something that I didn't gel with either. On the first read is the kind of carrot Angua story. Uh, and I remember it felt feeling kind of out of character, perhaps for Carrot to ditch the watch in the way that he does to go and follow Angua. I don't mind it so much this time actually because I think having taken the time to reread everything in the right order as well and relatively close together this time, tracking their relationship a bit more closely than I maybe would have done previously. I get it now. I think I'm a bit more invested probably in their relationship this time around than I would have been previously. I didn't care at all about the colon storyline the first time I read this. Now I kind of get it. I like it a lot more. So the groundwork for all that stuff's being laid here. And is it? I think I also remember at the time being quite challenged by this idea that like you could have things like the Clacks, so you could have like the Discworld version of the Telegraph, and that Discworld had contraceptives. Like I think at the time this was just a bit much for me to take in. Like in my head, Discworld was one way. The Discworld was a static setting, as almost all fantasy settings are. But actually, the genius of it is that it's not. It's an evolving world in the way that our world is as well. So yeah, that all just kind of took me a little bit by surprise. Found it a little bit hard to take in. But on rereading all the stuff with Sankey and the Scone of Stone or the Stone of Scone, which one's the real one and which one's the fictional one? Because the Stone of Scone is a real thing in the
It
real
is, it
world.
is a real thing. What's
I
it
think
called in the book?
I,
Is
th-
it called the Stone of Scone?
I think the Stone of Scone is the real stone, like the Scottish stone, and the
Yes.
Scone of Stone is the Discworld stone. I
Right.
think.
So
Uh,
I've got a novel called Spy to Lost Tribes, and the Stone of Scone features within it. Uh, so there's this stone that resides in Scotland, and it's also said to have resided in Ireland about 10,000, 12,000 years ago when we were ruled by kings. And there's also suggestions that there were two stones, one in Ireland and in Scotland, that were both stones of scones. Um, and it's something that in my novel that ties into the sort of the unionist right wing conspiracy theory that Ulstermen are the 12th tribe of Israel, which is a bit batty. So yeah, and
That's fun.
it dovetails very nicely here into being a little joke about the trolls and the dwarfs and the dwarf bread.
Yeah, yeah, you can sort of tell this is probably one that he's had in the bank for a while because yeah, we know that that's what dwarf bread is. It's essentially rock. So the fact that the stone of scone exists in real life and dwarfs are making bread from rocks, naturally a scone of stone or scone, depending, a scone of stone. I suppose
Scones.
it is meant to rhyme, is it? You have to say scone, scone of stone. Can't. The more I say it, the words are losing
I
all meaning.
can't think of a Scotsman who would pronounce it like that.
No, no, definitely not. Yeah, yeah, it's a good point,
We'll leave
actually.
that to the filthy Englanders.
Indeed. Yeah. So, yeah, the whole business with the dwarfs and the scone, the setup of it, I like. And yeah, sort of, I remember at the time vaguely thinking that this sort of had a bit of promise, at least. It was going to be a kind of a good, a proper, Vimes has a mystery to solve here. And it had sort of shades of, maybe man, I thought it was going to have maybe more shades of like Man at Arms, where there's like a proper kind of thorny who done it kind of mystery going on. It doesn't really go that way. And then, if anything, actually, the resolution to this storyline is, the way that it connects with the political story is great and it's really well handled. But again, maybe just not what I was looking for the first time I read it, but certainly something I appreciate a lot more this time
Certainly
around.
like the way the Carrot and Angua thing was handled. At least the course it takes, because we've long seen this problem Angua has with Carrot and his perfection, and I think this sort of shakes it up a bit. We don't actually see inside Carrot. We don't hear his thoughts the way we do every other character, but it does. The narrative's journeys do shake him up to his core a bit. It fleshes out a lot more about Anga that we'd never seen or been told before. And it's actually quite revelatory in terms of her royal trappings, her vicious upbringing. Um, Gavin.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm so fascinated by that. And it's something actually that he's weirdly touched on before, isn't it? Like the idea that the werewolves aren't just people who can turn into wolves. There are the wolves who can turn into people. So like if just the way Terry thinks things through to their natural conclusion, like it doesn't feel weird at all, really, for us reading a fantasy novel for a werewolf character to have a relationship with a human character. That's like everywhere. It's that happens in every werewolf story, right? But by that logic, then it must also make sense for a werewolf to be able to have a relationship with a wolf.
Right. And we're constantly told this throughout the novel by Angua that a werewolf isn't a wolf or a human. They're
Yeah.
their own distinct thing. And like, I certainly found that that was aimed at me as much as it was at Carrot in understanding that.
Yeah, 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 and I think it's a nice way to give a bit of that extra layer that makes those characters in Discworld just feel that extra bit more real, in the way that he's so good at, and that just by taking it, just by going, okay, well, let's take this to its logical conclusion, and then hang actually a really good story on it as well. Angua's journey through this book, I'm so fascinated by their relationship. The more I read it, the more I reread it as well. Like Angua and Carrot throughout the series have such an untypical kind of relationship, for all the fantasy tropes that they each inhabit. He's the kind of lost king and she's a dashing mythological creature. And they don't have the kind of stereotypical relationship that you would expect. I'm struggling to think of an example, and maybe I don't want to give one because I don't want to talk anybody else's writing down necessarily. But yeah, the fact that Angua is kind of uncomfortable with Carrot because he's such a good person isn't something you would immediately, or something I wouldn't immediately think I would be able to get a lot of story out of. And I would probably not obviously probably I definitely wouldn't write it anywhere near as well as Terry Pratchett can write it. But just that the idea, the fact that it sort of takes a bit of agency from her, you would think would maybe make her character and her story a bit weaker, but it doesn't. I mean, I'm really fascinated by that.
Yeah.
But I guess this is where this book is where that comes to a head, and she does take action, and she leaves to go sort out her own stuff, and he's the one that follows her. Um, is a really good dynamic actually.
Yeah, but you think of any superhero girlfriend, and like even at their best, they're pretty much just ciphers. There's very
Right.
little to them, very hard. It seems to have been very hard historically for writers to give them as much energy as a character. We'll come on later to the repercussions of Carrot quitting the watch. Um, what I found interesting was that Veterinary seemed to know it was coming, but not on a level that he could prepare for it. Um,
Yeah,
not flat-footed.
I would say yes. I mean, veterinary obviously has pretty advanced instincts and like is always playing 12 moves ahead, but I don't think anybody would expect Carrot to quit the watch under almost any circumstance. I think this is probably one of maybe three circumstances that are in any way possible that would cause Carrot to quit the watch. But I wonder, did he even know that himself until it happened? You know, like it definitely feels like a big kind of a really really big swing for that character to make. So no, I don't think it was necessarily prepared for, but then I don't think it really mattered all that much either. Like when veterinary shows up in the coach later in the book and like sees the strike and stuff, he's just kind of like, nah, Vimes will be back soon. It's okay.
Yeah, it does happen quite suddenly with Carrot. We get a mere moment, a couple of moments. He's got the note and he's off to see veterinary. So the decision's quite made. And really, as much a criticism as a just the way things are and the way things work, we don't know what goes on in Carrot's head, if this is something that he's considered before that might happen, and what would he do. I suspect he probably has. He's a deep thinker, that one. It's just that we don't see the thinks.
Yeah, it's a good point actually. I wish I had more detailed research in front of me, but how often, if ever, do we really get Carrot's like direct POV? I mean, I know in Guards, we and I think a little bit maybe in Man at Arms we get his letters home, but even that is filtered through like what he is prepared to tell his parents. I suppose we're not yet getting his POV directly out from inside his head, and I don't know if we ever do actually. I was quite interested in it, and it sort of reinforces Carrot's position as this sort of slightly mythical character who's, you know, the forgotten king, and he's like larger than life, and he's too perfect. So yeah, gosh, I've never actually thought about that because that really, really reinforces our perception. Like Terry wants the audience to have the same perception of Carrot that Angua has, or that Vimes has. He doesn't necessarily want us inside Carrot's head because that would kind of ruin it. Because then he would just be like a normal person like everybody else, and that's not how any of the other characters in Discworld see him. So that's not how Terry wants us to see him either. I don't. Perhaps I'm wrong about that. Perhaps I'm reading too much into that, but I think it really works, especially in this book where like that relationship between Kat and Angua is so important. Anything else? Cherry's back in action. Cherry and Detritus are both sort of back in action. We get to see a lot of them in this book.
Yeah,
Cat,
they're both part of the sort of police procedural that sets it up in Ankh-Morpork, and it's pretty much where the police procedural in Ankh-Morpork ends. which great gave me a lot of sort of remembrances of dusty old museums in Oxford with cabinets of curiosities, and
Oh yeah.
then we get them forming the major backbone of Vimes' mission to bunk, which I've mixed feelings about because I really was looking forward to that little sort of unit of what, four or so characters. But then about halfway through it, it tangents to just being a Vimes solo mission. So I think it lost something in that. But yeah, I really like seeing more Cheery. We get a lot more of Detritus as well, who's always fun.
Yeah, and then them going back to the old country, I guess, is in some ways feels like quite a natural place to take their story, in terms of now that we know a bit more about that part of the world through
Carpe
Carpe
Diem.
Jugulum, yeah. And those kind of themes of Outmore Park being the kind of the London or the New York of the disc where people from the old country kind of come, then naturally it follows at some point that they'll go back. I also remember I'm making myself out to be like borderline illiterate here as as a teenager, but I also really remember not getting on very well with the whole description and kind of exploration of dwarf culture, and just finding it a little bit esoteric and a little bit difficult to understand the first time round. So like all this stuff with the Scaun of Stone, and then when we eventually do, Cheery starts to explain a little bit, I guess, and Carrot as well, sort of explain a bit more about dwarf culture and this little miniature culture war that's going on in like Moorpark at this point. Like the dwarfs are all kind of at each other's heads or at loggerheads with each other, I think is what I intended to say there. And I find it just hard to kind of like get invested in that, I think. And maybe, I don't know, maybe just it reminded me too much of home.
Yeah, that whole sort of yearning for the homeland, that sort of migration, going away to make something of yourselves into the great big melting pot, and sort of how that relates to coming back home is really interesting. They handled like a sort of cultural narratives and such like, yeah.
Yeah, it's very well observed, but again, I think it's just like for me at the time was like it's just too real. Like this stuff's too real. I don't want that, but this world's always been quite real, but now it's getting grown up, which now I think is brilliant. It's great. It's exactly the right point in the series for it too, probably because we're what a couple of books past the midpoint at this stage, and if you're thinking this series is going to run 40 books, like it does need to mature and it does need to evolve and it needs to expand, and that's exactly what it's doing.
My favorite character journey here, which we see in other parts of the book, is Sybil, who is a
Mm.
character I feel hasn't really gotten the focus since Guards, and has kind of been sort of left behind to some extent, but we get so much more on her here. I was really grateful for all of it. Um,
Yeah, for sure. And that's actually part of the brilliance, I guess, of doing the diplomatic mission, compared to the kind of the slightly more kind of gung ho adventuring that was happening in Jingo, because it sort of meant for that to work, the Sybil did sort of have to stay on the sidelines to an extent, but now that they're like official ambassadors, and then it makes more, and she's of that world, it makes perfect sense for her to be like an intricate part of the story. And then
exactly, and if anything, like she's you said it yourself, she's of that world. She's the ambassador to the ambassador, for Vimes to understand. Sybil needs to explain it to Jack Scrap over here.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And she gets, we'll get to it later on, but she gets to take a bit of an active role as well, like in a few places, which is
Yeah.
great.
And though there's a lot of her sort of being resigned to stereotypical roles, homemaker, mother, that sort of thing, it always feels exciting, and it feels like it's being delivered in a new way, fresh take.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's fair as well that well, which we'll talk about a bit more later. That's even though Sybil is kind of teaching Sam how to exist in this world, like I think a little bit of Vimes is starting to rub off on Sybil as well, which
Yes.
is kind of cool. It's nice to see too. Yeah. Uh,
And have a relationship that we get a genuine insight to, usually through Vimes, but here more so from Sybil as well.
yeah, yeah, it's much more balanced in that respect, and I guess knowing what we know by the end of the book, you know, that they're gonna have a family that and that their story is gonna continue. We assume in some fashion that that's it's good to kind of build that picture because it's opening up, I guess, the possibility of stories about them as a family unit rather than just stories about Vimes. Vimes intel on Inigo Skimmer is confirmed when the convoy are set upon by bandits and 7 are found dead, which causes concern at the Fifth Elephant Inn. Carrot resigns from the watch in search of Angua with the help of Bum. He and Gasfood find her and Gavin in Uberwald. Things are, well, complicated. Meanwhile, Fred Colon is left in charge, which goes as well as could be expected. A man to watch, notes veterinary. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
I had sort of forgotten actually, yeah, that the reveal of Skimmer, it actually kind of comes relatively early if you're looking for it. You know, you're like, oh yeah, this dude's an assassin. Um, and a character I had completely forgotten existed. Like on second read, I was like, oh yeah, this dude. Like no recollection of this dude whatsoever. And yeah, I kind of like him. You know,
Yeah.
he's a international man of mystery.
Yeah, he feels like quite a, yeah, just like you said. And also there's an eerie edge to the guy. Um, and it's genuinely shocking when he's one of those sort of taken out because he honestly feels built up to be a survivor. Uh,
Yeah,
not
yeah, I think that's really masterfully handled actually, and we'll maybe talk about that a bit more when we get to it.
something a little supernatural about the guy.
Yeah, it's always like I think it's a risk, but maybe it's not a risk if you're as good a writer as Terry Pratchett is, but it can be a risk, I think, to give a character like a vocal tick or something like that, something that you have to kind of remember to put in, and then but then if you put it in too much, it becomes really grating for the reader. Uh, but then if you don't use it consistently, it becomes distracting. So like his little vocal tick, and it is, and it, like you said there, it's just meant to kind of make you question this guy a little bit. He's meant to unsettle you a little bit, and he nails it. You know, it totally works.
He reminds me of the character in the sorry, I'm gonna completely fumble this sentence, but in the last time we met Vimes at War, where his sort of other his
Oh
opposite,
sure, Ahmed.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, I hadn't considered that. Yes, and it's kind of good for Vimes to have that sort of somebody that he needs to keep an eye on. You know, because that just then just builds tension then into to all their scenes. If he's innately suspicious of this guy and turns out he's right to be suspicious of him, then that just gives all their interactions a little bit of extra tension, which is good,
it's a
especially for
good
the
part of the book before we realize that Inigo is working for veterinary and he's on the level. Yeah,
yeah, because I think and again this is really well done. Actually, I thought on this read setting Inigo up potentially to be the villain.
right.
You know, because he was technically an Agmore Park when, you know, Sankey was murdered, and then you find out that he's actually maybe killing other people, and he's definitely not being upfront about who he is. And then when we find out he's an assassin, it's like, oh shit, you know, he could be up to anything here. So yeah, I think that's really well handled, and the setup for it here is really good. And then yeah, so carrots out. We sort of talked about that already. Yeah,
Uh,
that
sorry.
the, I was just gonna say the idea that wolves and dogs are kind of known by their smell, like that's their name. I think is pretty funny, and how they
Yes,
arrive at.
it's genuinely shocked me in the best way possible, where bum is introduced as arse, which
Yeah,
is it's not full swear word. It's fairly soft. Um, you can it has a it's not ass. Ass is a bit safe. Arse has got that edge, vocal edge to it.
yeah,
And it Yeah, so you don't expect I can't comment, but I'm fairly sure the rest of the Discworld books have, there's not going to be a character called Fuckhead in it. Um,
Sadly, there is not.
but it generally shocked me to find a character called Arse in there, even if it was only the once, and I loved it.
Yeah, worth mentioning, obviously, that the only reason we know that is because Gaspode is at play
Gaspode, yeah, great
as
to have
well.
him back, and in his element, I might add.
Yeah, because he's been kind of on the sidelines. He has been there in a couple of books for a scene or two, and he's hanging out with his beggar friends. But now he gets to have a storyline in a book again, and that obviously hasn't really happened since Moving Pictures. So yeah, I'm trying to again. I really wish I knew for sure like which order I'd read all this stuff in the first time around, but I'm fairly certain I would have read Moving Pictures before this. But imagine if you didn't, or like if if Gaspo just kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, maybe it's fine. Would it be fine? What do you think? Like they just go, oh yeah, and by the way, there's a talking dog, but it's okay because you're in a world with vampires and werewolves and trolls, so maybe that's just fine.
Yeah, it was just to check it back. Okay, so how come Gaspode can talk and oh yes, moving pictures, but then we get the Light Fantastic and the first book, and we've got a talking sword and other talking trees, and
Oh yeah.
so yeah, I guess you can just riff off this fantasy setting and say it comes back to fantasy being a genre where you can literally do anything. It doesn't have to be about dragons and gold-clad bikinis. It can be like about, you know, uh, talking light bulbs uh,
Great prop.
or crayons that drink stuff.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's totally fair. And I'm more than happy to see him, and it's great actually thinking back, knowing what we now know. Like Gasboot wasn't originally meant to survive the events of moving pictures, so it's nice then that he's found another story, like a proper meaty story to give him, not to just kind of always leave him on the sidelines just because he didn't want to kill a dog. This is a character that he's got more stuff that he wants to do with. So yeah, this is a good way to slot him in because Carrot needs a guide to that world while he's not with Angua. So if he doesn't have Angua to help him with the dog stuff, he needs like who else is there in the Discworld Rolodex? Oh yeah, Gaspard.
And
Um,
Gaspard is full working class. Or sorry, underclass. He's one of the dregs of Ankh Park, like Fowler Ron. So it's
yeah,
good to see him get some sort of galvanizing action
and
under.
he's such well, yeah. Gaspard's an interesting one because he's sort of set up as yeah, as you say, like really streetwise and really cynical, and Carrot is the opposite of that. So they're immediately quite a good kind of pairing. Because
Yeah.
they're so opposed in their personalities, but like we know like down Gaspo does want to be a good dog deep down, and if anybody's going to bring that out of him, it's going to be Carrot. So yeah, at this stage, it's really exciting to kind of see where these two characters might end up together. Yeah, this time I enjoyed the Fred Colon stuff. Colon in charge of the watch stuff a bit more this time around. I guess maybe knowing that it doesn't go anywhere, I was happy to just kind of be along for the jokes this time. Whereas maybe first time I was like, oh right, well this is gonna have something's gonna happen here, and then they're like they're gonna go on strike and stuff. It's like, oh yeah, this is gonna have repercussions or it's gonna have an effect on the Vimes story somehow, maybe through veterinary, and then it doesn't. But actually, like it's kind of all right. It doesn't really matter. It's okay to have a standalone C story, I think.
I'm kind of divided on it. So one half of me sort of feels much the same. It's like, okay, it's gonna go somewhere. It doesn't go anywhere. I'm fine with that. And then there's a part of me thinks, well, the the whole guard has kind of fall apart because of Fred Colon, but it doesn't seem to affect Ankh-Morpork. Everything's fine with it. So what difference do the guard actually make?
Yeah, but I mean, remember, like they used to not make a difference. Like it was the guilds were in charge of everything, and now they get the watch are out doing like clamping carts and doing traffic and stuff, and they're kind of annoying
Oh,
people. Yeah, so maybe it's a kind of it's a way for veterinary to kind of gently reset that and maybe get them to maybe he feels the guards are overreaching somewhat, or I'm sure he put them up to it,
you say there, yeah, the
but he
fun
maybe
part of me.
yeah. So I mean, yeah. So it's potentially part of the kind of broader world building, I guess, that's going on alongside the Clacks and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I like it. Definitely find it easier to read, knowing that it is just that. It's just a bit of a sea story, a bit of a comedy runner. Um, because kind of outside of that, I mean, I wouldn't say this is the funniest Discworld book. You know, like the Uberwald storyline, like
How do you
it
ever?
has
It's yeah. There's a there's a sort of a coldness and a danger to it throughout. Um,
it's a
I
bit
I just noticed
darker.
the thing that we've sort of skipped over is that they find Gavin and Angua in Uberwald, and that's where the story began to come out about Angua's brother,
Hmm.
who is like an utter effing piece of monster. Um,
Indeed, yeah, and that like you were sort of saying at the start, you know, to start building out Angua's character and like what her upbringing was like and stuff, and to do it in a way that presents, you know, immediate threat not just for her and her storyline, but for Vimes and his storyline is really good. It's really well handled. Um, but one thing we didn't actually touch on that again something that probably confused me a bit too much when I was a kid were those like random, seemingly random scenes of somebody running away from a wolf. And we only really find out what they are much later.
this is deadly
Yeah,
to
yeah. Um, but I think, yeah, if you're like following Terry's inferences here, I think once you just sort of learn about Wolf, that starts to piece together. You go, oh yeah, Angua's family where this guy is probably was hunting somebody.
It's
Yeah,
a metaphor for blood sports, isn't it?
yeah. So this is all this information's sort of trickled out, you know, just here and there, and the picture of like just how much of a monster Wolf is it builds quite slowly, and that's good. It, like you want dread to build slowly, you know, and it creates a really good tone, I think.
And there's
If
also that class angle to it as well, with it, it being an analogy for fox hunting, but also people hunting, human hunting. What's that film with? Is it Ice-T and Ice Cube, where there's like a club of hunters that hunt men?
But Ice T and Ice Cube,
Yeah,
wow, how has that passed me by? Yeah, well, it's the first time hearing of this, but it sounds right up my street, so I'll have to circle back to that one for sure.
there's
Um,
also with Gavin. I feel there's a lot of information about him and his relationship with Angu that we aren't getting. Um, when we get the fairly solid story about him saving her from, um, is it the
different
hunt in itself?
from no, I think he just saves her from other wolves, and that side of Cow we're kind of introduced to the fact
Yeah.
that oh yeah, wolves
I
don't like
suspect
werewolves
there's a
either.
lot more going on in terms of their shared history and that has gone on between them that is kind of left unspoken by Terry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of has to be, otherwise, like it gets weird. Like, you know, I don't know how much about that I want to know. But like as I say, it's a concept that totally makes sense. It's totally
Yeah,
legitimate,
it
especially
does.
in his world. But yeah, I'm happy enough to leave that more or less kind of unexplored, I think.
And sometimes less is more.
Yeah. I also just want to say I don't know how much you will know or care about the Minecraft movie, but it's a big cultural phenomenon at the moment, and
In the PJ Hart household.
Oh yeah, yeah, my kids loved it. But I just want to point out that Terry Pratchett was out here giving wolves normal names like Gavin. Decades before the Minecraft movie had Dennis the wolf. So Terry Pratchett, 25 years ahead of the mark again. Although that's not no shade on the Minecraft movie, which I actually did enjoy quite a lot, and I do love Dennis. But Gavin is the original. Andy's looking at me like he's no idea what I'm talking about. He has no idea, and I think he's probably very very happy to keep it that way.
Yep. Innocence is bliss.
Indeed.
Acting Captain Colon fumbles the wages, triggering strike action. Angua reveals a violent family history. On the road to Bunk, obstacles are encountered and the embassy requires redecoration. Vimes and his guards meet with the dwarf's low king to be, Lady Margalota the vampire, and the werewolf Baroness Caroline von Uberwald. Other mysteries follow: an assault on Igor, the sabotage of a Clacks tower, and a secret room at the embassy. So it must be part three when absolutely everything happens.
Yeah, you can take that off your bingo card or your drinking game if you're playing along. But yeah, it totally kicks into gear, just as it rightly should at this stage. Uh, yeah, colon burning all the paperwork. I think that's certainly a lot more relatable now as an adult.
Um,
We've all thought
Big
about doing that.
Madness haven't been paid on time for the last 3 months, so
Yeah, I think
colon,
well,
you dick.
yeah, there's a few Fred colons. Well, we're not name any institutions
Not any
involved in, but
institutions involved. Not that,
uh,
not that one.
yeah, I mean the HMRC, we can name them. uh, but yeah, and actually just reading back over these summaries, sort of the journey to Bunk to get there
Bug.
was sort of longer. Yeah, it's a great name. Was longer than I sort of remembered. That's kind of probably as it should be. Like I dislike that in kind of like Game of Thrones or whatever, where like characters just magically teleport between locations for
Right.
the sake of the plot. Uh, and the fact that they can't do that, that's of relative narrative importance here because that's why the Clacks exists to sort of solve that problem to an extent. Um, yeah, the Low King is another like really obvious pun when you think about it. It's a in terms of the old High Kings, instead of the High Kings, dwarfs live underground, so they have a Low King. Also, they're small. So I was like, that's as low hanging a pun I think as he's ever reached for. But I think he has it, but he goes a bit deeper into it. I think they name drop I think a former Low King who's got a name similar to one of the Irish High Kings. Looks like a Brian Boru kind of
Oh yeah, vaguely.
sounding dwarf somewhere. I should try and find it in the annotations. So yeah, so I think between that and the Scaun of Stone, uh, he has given this this new deeper version of dwarf societies. He's given it quite a lot of thought. Oh yeah, Brain Blood Axe
Ah.
is the so yeah, you can sort of I don't know, maybe that's a stretch, but
The journey into Bunk is full of a lot of attacks and fear of attacks and then sort of like just right outside the city gates and just inside the city gates a lot of sort of demonstrations of power by various foot soldiers or various officials ordering various foot soldiers. And there's a lovely moment where Vimes sort of like just on a sort of last obstacle where one of the officials has decided to make yet another attempt to search a code Vimes and said, right, okay, fine, turn a coach around, we're going home.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's yeah, it's a wonderful sort of play of the cards on his part.
Yeah, and I think that gives you a bit of a hint of why it's Vimes who's been sent as well, because like nobody else, certainly none of the other Ankh-Morpork nobles, that we met, in Jingo or whatever. Like none of those guys would ever do that. They're not gonna be as much of a disruptor, certainly as Vimes is. Nobody's as stubborn as him, basically. And I think that's kind of what veterinary wants out of these interactions, you know. But also, hopefully, I'm remembering this right as well. The fake stone
Is inside the carriage, isn't it?
is smuggled in, so the fact that Vimes is refusing to let the carriages be searched, like that, also falls into the whole plot, you know.
Yeah, he's enabled the crime to be set up.
Yeah,
But and there's also this, as we find out later, there's this attempt to frame him, which, like, if the crime had been discovered, then presumably he would have been framed there and then.
yeah, yeah.
We usually
That.
start off with the book back cover description,
Oh
um,
yeah,
and we
good.
didn't this time. But if I had bothered to read this,
Go for it.
it would have revealed the whole thing. I haven't really got the reading light here to do it, but it pretty much says about Vimes being framed,
Mm.
which doesn't actually happen until four-fifths of the way through the book. So it's a good thing not spoiling myself with that.
Yeah, perhaps so. Yeah, I'm perhaps also that's maybe part of what fed into my initial misconception about what the story was going to be. Because, yeah, I sort of get that you don't necessarily want to set this up as like, oh, this is a relatively mature political drama set in a bunch of vampires and werewolves. It's a bit of a harder sell. Whereas if you already know about Discworld and you know about Vimes, and he's been framed for a murder, or he's been framed for whatever, then
What will Vimes do now?
yeah. So I totally get why they want to sell it that way, and I mean they're not wrong. That does happen. Just takes a while to
Yeah.
kind of get going. Um, but
And
that
it's not the center focus either. There's a lot of other big things happening to Vimes at that same moment, such as being on the run for his life and trying not to die.
indeed,
Yeah.
indeed, the
Which is slightly more pressing.
slightly, just slightly. Yeah.
The
So we're just
the
gonna go through the list there. So we've done the Low King a little bit. How
Yeah, so
they're
there's this like
characterized.
weird sort of 60-page kind of chunk where Vimes goes around and visits the three most important um, political figures.
Yeah.
With the Low King, Margoloda the Vampire, and Caroline von Uberald. Low King's quite a nice, wise kind of figure. Not all pleasantries, but an authentic individual.
Yeah, that's fair, and I think it's quite important in a way because the other two are a bit, they're not, I mean, they have their nuances for sure, and it's funny that like Lady Margalotta is on the wagon, as it were, but like I guess what we're being presented with here as the reader is like all these people, these are the political powers at play, and one of them is probably responsible for the crimes. Like that's kind of what we're being offered up. So the fact that the Low King is the most nuanced, but is probably also the one closest to the crime. It helps keep you on your toes in terms of like, right, what's actually going on here? Because I agree that the Low King, who turns out to be potentially a female, actually, we find out very close to the end, could actually be a Low Queen. Uh, with all the kind of political upheaval we're being told about amongst the dwarfs, like they could very well be like a suspect in this, especially when it comes to framing Vimes. So yeah, it's good that they sort of feel that they're quite canny and there's somebody who could maybe go toe to toe with Vimes. Whereas the other two are a bit more, they're not comic relief, but they are, well, I find the werewolf scenes quite funny actually. Where like when they start when he says like bath and vet and like they
Yeah.
have their like
It's
canine reactions to that.
quite an odd family unit. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so you're right. Like that 60 pages where it's just like, hey, here's all the bad guys. I don't mind it at all though, because I think they're all quite distinct and yeah, the Low King in particular actually is really well drawn.
Yeah, I think it I mean Yeah, it really works. There's a level of just exposition to it, but in a kind of a, well, that's the point kind of way. Yeah, it
Yeah,
feels like its own little chapter within, a book without chapters.
yeah, and it's good. Like we mentioned before, this is where sort of Sybil kind of comes back into her own a little bit, and she has a pre-existing relationship with Caroline, and that like, yeah, this werewolf lady was mean to Sybil, so like she must be the bad guy, like straight away pegged. You know, why did you never write her back? Uh, so yeah, that was fun.
Mario
I did.
Little's an odd one in that yeah, we get a decent, I think, oh, I'm a bit hazy about this part of the book, but she's like a recurring character throughout the novel who will pop in to help Vimes out, to throw in some new information to light the whole sort of um, vampire giving up the blood kind of element, um, which actually has forms. I don't have a quote picked out for this episode, but there's a line that she uses later that is certainly one of my favorite quotes, which is something along the lines of "Beware the vampire that has given up blood." That sort of addict, because they will find new ways to go about inflicting that pain and damage and getting that fix.
Yeah, so her obsession now is power and control. It's political. She's channeling that into her political career, I guess. And yeah, she's managing things very much from the shadows by like giving Vimes a nudge here or there to kind of she doesn't want she the werewolves to take place or to take power. She doesn't want a civil war amongst the dwarves. She wants to keep everybody kind of at the level that they're at because that just suits her schemes. And yeah, in retrospect, it maybe seems more obvious than it actually is. It's actually quite clever, that we literally just had this book where the vampires were really quite credible and terrifying antagonists, with the witches in a totally separate story. But if you're reading these books in order as they come out and you're coming into this one and there's a vampire there and thinking about how hard it was, how close Granny Weatherwax came to being defeated by vampires, you're like, okay, they could be in trouble here. Vimes could be in trouble here with this vampire. But
Marlowe's is much more cranial.
yeah, but yes, but so that I'd be surprised if that wasn't at least a little bit intentional on his part. I always think it's a really good narrative trick when it's done well. And the example I can think of that I think I like quite often actually is the androids in the Alien series. So in Alien One, the android Ian Holmes character is a bad guy. Spoilers for Alien, by the way, if you have. So then in the second one, they introduce Lance Henriksen's character, who's also an android, and then so it's set up that there's something off with this guy. He's suspicious. The androids are all kind of creepy and evil, but then he turns out he's nice and he saves the day. So yeah, to use the previous books in the series to kind of to influence what you want the reader to think about certain characters, I think is quite clever. Because you don't miss it if you didn't read Carpe Jugulum, but if you did, you just get maybe a little bit of extra tension in those scenes. You're just going to turn those pages a little bit faster, maybe just to see what's going to happen.
Um, the werewolf family, the father is quite it's quite a weak-willed sort of, comes across as a bit of a simpleton, really. He just likes to sort of uh lounge around, like more like a dog than a wolf,
Yeah,
really.
well, that's an interesting concept, and I
Oh,
don't know.
sorry, I've very limited. I've no experience with wolves at all.
Likewise,
But
uh,
more, so I guess more realist wolf than fantasy wolf.
yeah. So I wonder. I'm not sure if this is a Terry Pratchett original concept or whether this is something that kind of exists in other werewolf stories or folklore or whatever. But the idea that he's he's like that because he spends too much time in his wolf form, and the more time he spends as a wolf, the more like a wolf he becomes. He's kind of forgetting how to be human, and I suppose we get inklings of that from Granny when she goes borrowing and stuff like that. And it's always kind of funny, human shaped characters acting like animals is just always funny. There's always going to be
Yeah,
humor to
it's
be wrote for that.
a bit of a trope, but I don't think it's been played to laughs quite as well as it, or even as much as it is done here.
Yeah, sure. And then even though we were sort of saying that like there's not as many laughs in general in this book, and it is a bit kind of darker in tone maybe than some previous ones, like he's an important character then because Wolf is the real threat, and he's a genuine, scary, like terrifying villain. So the fact that his dad is basically like a golden retriever, but a golden retriever who still bite your head off, is quite good. It balances out that dynamic quite well, I
And
think.
it's quite a portrait. Thinking of a number of crime news stories I've read, um, where there's a killer with quite a dysfunctional family unit around them who, to some extent, sort of enable the culprit. So that's very clearly what Wolf's mother is doing. If she had any sort of fear of her son at all, or any desire to stop him, she's pretty much just rolling over and letting him have his way. And the father even more so by kind of burying his head.
Yeah, the fact that the mum, like we already get a sense that she's kind of a bitch because she's a dog. Because she was mean to Sybil. But yeah, the fact that she is more than happy to let her son's kind of this power play and that he wants to make and the amount of bloodshed that's going to cause and stuff like that's just a day at the office for her. That's kind of what the game is as far as she's concerned. So she's just that, yeah, everything that Sybil as like a posh noble person doesn't want to be, like that's everything then that Sarah is. So they're kind of a nice contrast for each other that way. And I think after this scene, well, I think maybe there is still some doubt actually as to whether the werewolves are directly involved in the stone scone situation, because we know that Angua's got her own storyline going on here. So this could just be part of that storyline. We're not yet clear whether those two stories are going to intersect. So we know that Wolf and these werewolves, we know that they're bad news. We know that they're definitely bad news for Angua, but we only kind of suspect that they might be bad news for Vimes as well. So it's sort
But
of,
yeah, it is riffed on that they have something going with the uh is it dwarfs or
yeah. So with the other sect, with like Albrecht, whatever, the other dwarf, I guess. Yeah. So like they're playing politics.
but we
Um,
don't know the extent of it, just that there's something.
yeah, because I think we're meant to get the sense that they both are potentially that like
Yeah.
Lady Margalotta is potentially back in one faction and maybe the werewolves are back in another faction, maybe only very thinly alluded to, I think. But the
And,
physical threat of the werewolves, we're not quite sure how much that's going to come into play for Vimes at this stage, maybe.
and Albrecht too is a character we only really see very briefly in the Low King section, but he has been built up to be another potential end boss villain. And of course, he's really nothing of the sort, which is quite a delightful surprise.
Yeah, and I think on the reread, I mean, it's totally fine. It's more than fine. I mean, it's very well handled actually. But on the reread, I think you kind of go, yeah, this guy doesn't get enough page time to be the real villain. It would be unsatisfying if he turned out because like you say, he's only in a few key scenes, and the scenes are well written, and he's a well realized character, but he doesn't appear enough. He doesn't have enough agency of his own on the page for him to be like a satisfying reveal of a villain. I think what is actually revealed about him at the end is much more satisfying. but we'll get to.
We got a few
Uh,
other things going on here. We get an assault on Igor, who I assumed isn't the same Igor from Carpe Jagulum. Um, and
well,
nowhere is there. It's suggested that that is the case, although maybe I've mispronounced his name.
no, no, I think you've nailed it. Yeah, I love the Igors, and their interchangeable nature up until the end as well, where you get the younger modern Igor is delightful too. Yeah, I mean, I think you could tell in Carpe Jugulum like how much fun Terry was having writing Igor. So there's now we get multiples, and it's a delight. Still take every time it just takes me again a line or two to just get to do the like internal translation of Igor's speech patterns. It used to annoy me a little bit, but I'm over it now, and the joy that they bring outweighs the slight inconvenience of having to parse their dialogue a little more slowly.
Yeah, he's a fairly sort of, I want to say sad, but a sympathetic figure for for a trope character that comes out of that sort of monster template. He's
Yeah,
kind of somebody you feel very sad and bad for, and just want to sort of make him a nice cup of tea. Um, so I felt his assault here, and I think this might be where there's talk of like getting some of his body parts on ice. Well,
yeah.
it's much later in the book,
It's
isn't it?
a, but
But
I think
this is
it's
where
it,
the carriage is ransacked, and he is
yeah,
he's smacked about the head as on the assailant's way into the carriage.
yeah. The fact that Terry's kind of like fleshed out this whole almost subculture of Igors, like out of what is essentially like a guy character from the previous book, who's yeah the stereotypical, you know, Universal Pictures horror sidekick. But now there's like this whole culture of them, and they're like an interconnected family, and
Work culture.
they're surgeons, and they help people, and like and then they've got a young one who's like rebelling against the traditions and wants to do new weird things by growing ears on mice and stuff. And you're like, this is all yeah, literally from like you said, like a trope character. He's created this really like fully fleshed out kind of culture for them, which is brilliant, and again just shows like his natural inclination is just to always take something to its logical extremes. Like if these people really existed, what would their place in society be? And it's fascinating, like just to see how his mind works that way.
There's two more bits to this bit. The sabotage of the Clacks Tower and a secret room at the embassy, kind of like a James Bond double bill here, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's Sybil's the one because she's like off doing wife stuff. Like, oh, I'm gonna measure for carpets, but like she actually then that allows her to get involved in the A story and discovers the secret room. And then I guess this is probably where we start to think, oh, what did you call the guy? Sleeps, the guy who was the owner of the secret room.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and we
He,
start to think, oh yeah, he's the guy who was getting chased at the start. Okay, so things are starting to kind of piece together a little bit, and yeah, and then when the clacks goes down, then like something's about to happen, like shit's about to get real. Their means of communication with home has been cut off, and even the way that he like describes the clack star. So he's only kind of come up with this idea for this book, but he already knows like the towers have to be constructed in a certain way. They have to be stone up to a certain level so people can't burn them down. Like the way that the guys who operate it, how they live, how long their shifts are, like what the kind of supply situation is. Like he's thought it all out so well. So
it's
in this,
not quite the Discworld has internet, but there is a real consideration of sort of environment and building the technological development into the construction, into the architecture.
yeah, it feels extremely plausible. Like that's the thing about it. Even though we're in this like insane fantasy world and we're in this like horror themed country within that insane fantasy world, like these original concepts that he has come up with feel so plausible. With
I
it,
can't quite picture Clacks thoroughly. The nearest I can come is a windmill tower. So I see a lot of that works for me in terms of
yeah,
how Pratchett describes it and how I visualize it gets me there.
yeah. I think again, without spoiling anything, yeah, I think this iteration of it that feels pretty bang on. Yeah.
And also, like, secret rooms are always fun. I've been in a few secret rooms.
Oh,
My time,
just drop that in casually. Explain.
um, there is a castle. Is it Castle Dawson? So a place in Northern Ireland. And as a Boy Scout, we would go off somewhere to a big stately home in the summer, and we'd alternate between two locations. And one of them had a big secret passageway.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and it was great because the wonderful scout leader, Garth Owens, would uh, gather the leaders together, tell the kids a ghost story. And the kids who'd been there before knew what was coming, that one of the leaders was hiding in this secret room.
Oh, no
And
way.
at a certain point would just spring out and scare everybody to bits. Um, and the newbies never knew this was coming.
Yeah,
Um, but
excellent.
I'm sure that's not the only one. I know I've been on sort of other tours where there's been like little walls have opened to secret rooms, or in the case of, I don't know if it was Castle Dawson, but it was a bookshelf passageway, which are, yeah, always the
Of
coolest.
course. I remember, I don't know if this still is a thing, but there was certainly a bit of a fad in the previous decade with the pre-COVID days for like these secret speakeasies, certainly in the States. So like there's this cocktail bar uh in New York, it's in Brooklyn somewhere, I can't remember what it's called, where you have to go into the payphone, and you lift the payphone. It's a hot dog shop, and you go in and you lift the payphone, and then the back of the payphone opens up, and then you're in the speakeasy, you're in this cocktail bar. That's that's behind the hot dog place, and it's really cool. And me and my wife went there. Not the last time we were in New York, but the time before, and we thought this was class. We were totally we totally bought the hype. So then on our next trip, we found this other one, and it was in the back of a laundrette. We like found it, on Instagram or something, and like, all right, this is gonna be cool. And we went to the one in the laundrette, and we went out the back, and it was like
A
not.
methamphetamine lab.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't as bad as that, but it was not as classy as the other one. And it was just me and her and this one other guy. He was there on his own in the back of a laundrette drinking like $20 cocktails. And we're like, nah, the shine is worn off this concept. I don't think I want to go to these secret bars anymore. This one feels a bit dodgy.
That's a fantastic tangent. I'd really like our listeners to pick up on. Share some secret room stories of your own.
Yeah, your bad, just your best and worst speakeasy experiences. If anybody else has found themselves in the same position that we did. Uh,
Yeah, there's that whole sort of behind this fake wall. There's that whole little technological lab thing that Vimes and Co. Find. It's filled with records and stuff, and it's not high tech, but there's enough there to give a sort of a feeling of, because it's a very espionage is a very technical sort of a technological sort of act, even if we're not talking about the hardware, just the act of it, of that level of deep research and attentiveness,
mm.
consciousness.
Yeah, that idea of sort of medieval style or fantasy style intelligence work is quite fascinating, actually. And I sort of slightly wish we learned a bit more, maybe about Sleeps and what he'd been up to and his whole adventures before he was eaten. The bloody thing was never stolen.
Ah,
It's a great twist. Anyway, it occurs to Inigo Skimmer you could knock on either side of a door. It's great. I love this bit. At the ceremony, Vimes foils an attempt to kill the Low King and is rewarded with jail. On the run from Wolfgang's pack, he receives help from Lily Margolotta, three sisters, a flammable barn, and a greasy tree. Death visits the uncertainty of it all. And Carrot, Angua, and Gavin guide him to the Clacks Tower. On Ankh-Morpork soil, Captain Tantony is given much to think about, as is acting Captain Colon. And Sybil treats a locked room as she would in a strict school for well brought up girls. So now we're like, if you think it was getting a lot that was happening before, it's really happening now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we knew, or maybe we should have known, like when Vimes is going to be sent to another country as an ambassador, that he's inevitably going to end up in jail in that country. He seems like the type. He's
Yeah,
going to
potentially
definitely
seen that coming.
going to upset the wrong person, and he's going to wind up in jail. So yeah, we get the promise of that delivered here. So so many good bits in this. I think this is maybe the start of the section where I kind of sat down and just read it all, pretty much in a day, or maybe it was just after this actually. But the the scene with Skimmer in the clock tower is one of my favorites.
Well, that's a fantastic line about the other side of a door.
Yeah,
It was very unexpected. I thought Skimmer would be somebody that would be there until the end, or at least the final act.
yeah, yeah. I thought on this read I could see a bit of misdirection in terms of setting him up as potentially being involved in the plot or being somebody who certainly at least who has an agenda that's kind of contrary to Vimes's agenda. I'm kind of expecting conflict there to be resolved, but so to set him up as extremely competent as and extremely dangerous and a potential antagonist, then to have him taken out here at around the midpoint, just after the midpoint, by the real antagonist, then we're like, okay, now we know, now stuff's really starting to happen. Like the kind of the sense that the werewolves are they're actively kind of involved here. They're killing Ankmore Park people. Like they're messing with the Clacks. Like their threat is only getting greater as we kind of move into the back end of the story.
Yes, the center of this part is the flight, the run, the hunt.
Yeah,
Um, And it's positively chilling. This is where Wolf comes across as a real top tier villain with his I think his mannerisms. Firstly, his constantly referring to Vimes as civilization,
mhm.
his taunting and teasing. This guy's a sheer psychopath. Um,
Yeah, and it's interesting that I mean, you know, the extent to which Lady Margalotta is or isn't willing to get involved, because like she could have saved him from all of this, but part of her plan, I think, I don't know. I mean, obviously she has to do this for the story to just occur, but I think kind of the in-universe justification for that is potentially interesting, where it's important to her that Vimes is angry enough, or has no choice really but to take Wolf out. Like that's what she wants to get out of this. So if Wolf hunts him and he survives, like that's there's no way he's just going to let that lie. She knows if Vimes survives this hunt, then Vimes is going to be coming for Wolf. So
yeah,
I think this is engineered to really set them on a path that neither of them can kind of go back from. That one of them is kind of going to have to kill the other by the end of this book. So I think that's what her kind of motivation is potentially here.
yeah. I hadn't spotted it to that degree at all, and I think that's largely because although Wolf says to Vimes he's operating under these rules of the game, this is how it works. As that hunt develops, it becomes, in my reading, clearer and clearer that Wolf has no intention of honoring his own rules.
Yeah,
Certainly, certainly a villain would play that in the final act, which Wolf does and continues to, but
yeah.
it feels like it comes much earlier here that he's just a stone cold killer and he's um delighted about that.
Yeah, I think Angua actually just comes out and states that outright possibly somewhere later on, she says that her dad played the game, but he played it by the rules, whereas Wolf cheats. Yeah, I mean that whole but I mean I don't think like we're over examining it because it's why we're here. But oh,
That's what
sorry,
we do. This is
pardon
why
me.
you tune in. What I didn't quite get was the reference to the three sisters, who one of whom lends Vimes a pair of trousers.
Yeah, I mean this went like probably about 5 miles over my head the first time I read it for sure. So it's all just like a big Chekhov reference. It's like the Three Sisters is I think the play is just called the Three Sisters. So they're just Chekhov, they're just random Chekhov characters who are just here. And then Uncle Vanya's trousers. Uncle Vanya is another Chekhov play. And I'm
Okay.
not quite sure why that is. I think is it maybe because Uberwald is sort of coded as like Eastern Europe slash Russia a little bit, maybe, with some of the accents and stuff. And I guess werewolves, we always kind of code them as like Romanian because of Dracula and stuff. So I wonder, is it just because it's like, is it as simple as that? That's just meant to be like, this is the part of the world we're in. Whereas if things are vaguely Russian. So here are Chekhov's Three Sisters. And here's Uncle Vanya's trousers, and it's as simple as that, I think, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I certainly got that sort of allusion to Europe, though much less so the Russian part of it. Um,
No, it does. It feels a bit out of nowhere, but now, having spent whatever, how many years, 3 years at university, and well, now nearly 4 years now at university, studying humanities, I now get the Chekhov jokes. I still don't know why they're there, but at least I understand.
Keep studying because it's all
Time,
going to be worth it.
yeah, time well spent there. Um,
So,
Yeah, just says I'm just double sourcing myself here, just checking in the annotated Discworld. Yeah, the whole section is a riff on Chekhov's 1901 play, Three Sisters. Yeah, with all the various misunderstandings and pauses, and then yeah, Uncle Vanya's trousers. Yeah, don't know if anybody has got any insight to that. I'd be very interested to hear it. What's the Chekhov connection?
come on, share your Chekhov stories.
Yeah, I'm sure that the overlap of our fans and Chekhov fans, I'm sure that Venn diagram is just a circle. That's those are the people we appeal to, I assume.
Death pays a visit more as, I guess, like a harbinger than anything else. That there's going to be death here. But we find him in quite, or he finds us in quite the form that he usually takes with Rincewind. He's quite conversational and jovial, and
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, obviously it's great to have death, and his scenes are always funny. And this book, it needs that. There's not a single joke I'd want to take out of this book because I think it's a little bit light on jokes.
uh,
But I do sort of feel that Death is cheating on Rincewind here a little bit. Like, like Rincewind's the only person that Death. Rincewind's the only person who isn't about to die. I think that Death talks to because Rincewind has a habit of always surviving. So Death's sort of become his mate, kind of. So the fact that he's now like that's happening for other characters, I don't know. It ruins it slightly for me.
yeah, I think Rincewind being a magician gives it that sort of differential from Vimes. Although Vimes is a character who is constantly getting six shades of stuffing knocked out of him, and in this case, it's never more true, and it's starting to become a little bit of a trope with Vimes, but. Yeah, I think if it's going to happen, it's going to happen here. And just while we're mentioning Rincewind, I think that Rincewind seemed to be very much the character Terry initially decided for as a vehicle to introduce us to various parts of the terrain.
Yeah.
And it's more and more become the witches and now Vimes that are going to be your Discworld travel agent.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think part of that is, how the series is maturing. Well, they kind of go hand in hand, I suppose. Rincewind as a character doesn't really experienced very much in terms of growth. Certainly not by this point in the series, anyway. So you can't. It's difficult to put him in positions where you can explore like the politics of, say, of a society, because like nobody's ever going to make Rincewind the ambassador to
Oh,
World, whatever. So
oh no.
so even though, so when Rincewind shows up in Interesting Times and the Australia one, whatever that was called, Last Continent, he basically just tears a path through those places. He's just like on the run, basically, constantly. So if you want to have a slightly slower pace, slightly more considered, slightly deeper narrative, I don't think Rincewind's going to be the go-to character. Which personally I'm more than happy with, especially at this stage of the series, or maybe less so the first time I read it, but definitely more so now.
The Clacks Tower gives us more of that sort of CSI Discworld, that police procedural forensics mystery thingamajiggy, jiggy, and then we get Vimes and Captain Tantoni, which is kind of a sort of a late entry in character relationships. That's a really interesting one. We get the sense that Vimes is really, after some struggles, taking Tantoni under his wing and showing him how to do things properly. And we do eventually get some change in Tantoni.
Yeah, he has a little three beat story. Like he's one of the guards who wants to search the carriage at the start or whatever. So, and then we can touch base with him again here, and then at the end he kind of steps up and helps out. So it's kind of nice, and the relationship between Vimes and other coppers is touched on a little bit in Jingo, obviously. So I think that's something that he's obviously interested in. Uh, and yeah, and the dynamic here is obviously different, but it pays off totally at the end. Just when you're speaking about the procedural element there, like we sort of completely skipped over like what is essentially like the MacGuffin in this story, which is like when Vimes and Cheery go to investigate the throne room or the scone
Right.
room, I guess. I think it's quite telling probably that we did that because of how all that plays out. But within that, like on this reading, I do feel that that whole mystery and that case, as it were, that procedural element of that case is really well plotted out, and you're genuinely not sure how this was done or who was behind it. And the fact it's the way that they've done that is because they are, instead of going, oh, none of the characters can figure this out, it's a mystery. It's the opposite. Like Cheery and Vimes can think of like any number of ways that it could have been done, and that makes it actually harder for them to solve that because they're
Yeah.
like,
Too
there's
much
like
choice.
there's like a dozen ways you could steal this thing. So yeah, I thought that was actually really well constructed, and it keeps that whole element alive up until I guess Vimes gets thrown in jail.
Yeah, and it's also quite visually active, a scene. That's what makes this writing, when it is done so well, really a new level, because you can picture these dwarf museums,
Mm,
these dwarf uh, royalty relic showrooms, the completely, the whole, well, we got the introduction to the Low King, and we've got the whole cavernous labyrinth, that's the whole city underground,
hmm
um, that we can sort of pick apart from little tiny bits of our own memories and put them together with what Terry is describing to build that whole picture, is really quite a feat. It's, as writers ourselves, we've got a really fantastic master in Terry.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, yeah, coming back to the series with a slightly more critical eye, uh, it has been such a joy. Actually, things like that, like the mastery of the craft is just on display in every single one of these books is really, really quite something. And even ones like this where I was maybe not a big fan the first time round, like this, like it's so well constructed. It's just it's the world building is so on point, and these little narrative devices are so well deployed within them. Are just like, if anything, I mean, yeah, I would still reserve maybe that slight criticism that like this book is potentially a bit overwhelming, perhaps at times, in that front because there's so much world building going on and so many concepts. But that's not to say that they're not all well written. They definitely are. You just have to, yeah, I think take your time with them, absorb them, let them all sink in. 'Cause he's not spoon feeding. There's lots of stuff here that he doesn't spoon feed. He lets you piece things together while he's doing all this heavy world building as well. So yeah, it broke my brain a little bit back in the day, but I'm totally here for it now.
Yeah, yeah, that's really nice that we get um that room to think about stuff ourselves. I think that's very important. I'm just writing a review of a Doctor Who episode that's quite like that. And often the problem with new Doctor Who is that there's kind of a level of emotional pressure to see a story and the emotional stakes in it a certain way. Um, Whereas more competent writing just kind of lets the audience just pick up on those
Hmm.
um, without forcing them to feel a certain way and to get our own reactions from them. And I guess that's kind of key to storytelling. You need the reader or the audience member to be an active part of that process, even if they don't know it for some time off.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's
It's always talked about in comics theory how in Scott McCloud's Invisible Art, where you see on panel one the guy with the axe chasing the girl, and panel two is the view outside the apartment and the scream. And McCloud says it's the reader that decides what goes between those panels. It's a reader who throws the axe and kills the girl. And
yeah, yeah, for real.
I thought that was always a bit of an exaggeration, but it really genuinely is true
No,
that the
I,
viewer needs to be an active participant in how that story is told for it to work.
yeah, for
Or
sure.
at
I
least
mean,
I think they are. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. I think it is an easier trick to pull off sometimes in visual storytelling, like comics and like film and TV, because the implications come on the cut or come on the line between the panels. Whereas when you're writing prose and you're an omniscient narrator and you can tell the audience literally anything you want to tell them, the hardest thing to do then is to withhold that information and let them come to their own conclusions and imply things and actively engage them. And there's, I think, very few better writers at that than Terry Pratchett. I know that, to be fair, like I think it's Hemingway's iceberg theory, and obviously he was a prose writer and he was a master at that as well. So it's not like prose writers don't generally know how to do it or that there's no theory of that in prose. But like certainly for me, it comes more naturally to me, or I can also identify it easier, I think, in visual medium for that reason. But prose writers who can do it well, I think, like they're kind of few and far between. But who can do it really well anyway, I think are quite few and far between. But Terry Pratchett is up there with the best of them for sure.
I did not know Hemingway was associated with the iceberg theory, so I'm going to go and look that up
I,
afterwards.
I hope I haven't misattributed to that to you, but yeah, I was doing a bit of like narratology reading last week, which is sort of my job. So yeah, if I've got that wrong, it'll be quite embarrassing. Don't tell my supervisors.
We get the final beat is Sybil gets locked up by her pen pal and decides she's going to launch her escape with duvet covers tied around the outside of the window, which is kind of I think you had alluded to earlier the first the neck or the next big Sybil moment. It's just so much joy, devilishly fun, a bit of the River Song type character here, certainly able and capable in her own.
Yeah, exactly. And it's quite an old school
Yeah, it's quite fun.
Bit of daring do, isn't it? Yeah, the old sheets around the bedpost and out the window, like a classic Hollywood era escape. Yeah, but just having her be active and just having her doing stuff and choosing to, you know, stop writing her Christmas letter to this woman who hates her, like just like taking a bit of her own agency back, and you know, she's about to obviously, or she's in the process of having this significant life event. She's going to have a child, and I guess she's probably positioning or wants to position herself in the world like, who do I want to be as a mother? You know, this person that she was versus this person that she's kind of becoming through Vimes, like the Sybil as was, you know, the Sybil who existed before she married Vimes. Would she have done this? I'm not sure if she would have. So it's kind of nice to see elements of Sam rubbing off on Sybil and her kind of taking action.
Probably not. I mean, she's done it. It tells us she's done it before as a young girl, but I also get the feeling Sybil's not exactly a young woman. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah, I think that. Well, yeah, not no spoilers or whatever, but yeah, the kind of the biology of like, right, okay, well, yeah, they're a couple of a certain age, so they obviously weren't expecting, I don't think, to have a child, and then so their lives are significantly upended by that. Which just all obviously remains to be seen.
yeah, so it's yeah, definitely some vibes coming out.
Yeah, great to see it, and it's just that classic way of extending the jeopardy in one of these kind of set pieces where you know character A is rushing to rescue character B, but by the time they get there, character B has already escaped, but into more danger. You know, it's a great way. It's a totally classic way of extending a set piece, but that's the point of the book that we're now in. You know, we we're getting our chases, we're getting our showdowns with the villains. So I mean, it's totally legitimate to play the hits in that regard, I think. And I think we know by this stage the audience or the reader has kind of probably pieced together the fact that maybe Sybil's pregnant or that something's going on because she's like tried to talk to Sam a couple of times and hasn't been able to. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm on the reread and I know, but like it doesn't come out of nowhere. Like it is implied a few times that she has something important to tell him.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't see it coming at
In,
all. Total
interest.
surprise.
Good to know. Good to know. Yeah, and probably that has maybe does have something to do with the age of the characters. It would be like it's kind of the last thing on your mind, maybe.
Yeah.
But certainly, if you do know that, then you're thinking, well, this is even extra jeopardy because she's pregnant and she's like climbing down the outside of a castle and she's about to be eaten by werewolves. So, yeah, no, I mean, even though it's fairly standard plotting, I think you know it really it works particularly well for her as a character.
It certainly seems like a book that rewards with foreknowledge on reread.
Yeah, maybe it does. I mean, as I say, it certainly helped me make my peace with Colon's story. Um, yeah, I think like this, knowing what you know about Sybil going into this certainly kind of increases the stakes as well. So yeah, no, I mean, I'm really glad I reread this.
Part 5, Stuff the Marquis of Flaming Fantalier. During the rescue of Sybil, Wolfgang dispatches Carrot, Gaspode, and Gavin. Dee's plot is exposed and the king explains the mystery of the scone. Sybil negotiates fat prices and her husband's brain functions upon revealing unexpected news. Lady Margalotta warns him to beware of reformed vampires, and there's a final face-off between Vimes and Wolf. At the coronation, there are gifts, and an Iger joins the watch. Did I pronounce his name correctly?
On that occasion, no, but you did before.
While Sam and Sybil enjoy their postponed honeymoon, Carrot explains things to Colon and Nobby.
Great ending. We love how everything comes together in this bit. Like the real sense, like Wolfgang just seems so unstoppable. He's such a good villain. Unfortunately, I think we kind of know that like out of everybody that he's going up against, Vimes isn't gonna die. Carrot isn't gonna die. Gaspode, we know now, probably isn't going to die. So Gavin's number is up, unfortunately.
Yeah, with us not long enough. Gone too soon. Um, but the confrontation that kicks off this little part that I've made is it's pretty messed up.
Yeah,
Um, it looks like Gaspode is dead. I believe
again.
that to be the case. Um, Carrot is as bad as his Gavin's dead. Carrot being so seriously injured is kind of yeah yeah. It's Superman is dead kind of moment.
Yeah, like it's great. Yeah, because it is that kind of moment, like you say, and it really kind of sets the power level for Wolfgang. Because like Carrots, like after we've seen it, like we've seen the hunt and everything, and we know, but this is now that they're in a stand-up fight with him, and like you say, he can make a mess of Carrot, and it barely even breaks a sweat to do it. You just think like, how can you possibly stop this guy? But I didn't really think Carrot was going to die though.
No, but it's still one of those great sort of horror moments in serialized fiction. I mean, I'm thinking of another a couple of episodes towards the end of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where something pretty heavy happens to a regular character.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so you feel the um, Carrot gets his arm broken, and you kind of feel that, and I'm sort of not sure if that's going to be reflected on in coming books. I mean, presumably it will heal. Um,
Well, I think by the end of this, because he's got Igor's kind of,
oh yeah, he's
to look after him, I think
with
he's
medicine,
bounces back pretty quickly. Yeah, which is good.
but
But
it's still nobody kills Optimus Prime, right?
no, of course, not more than once.
Children of the 80s.
Yeah,
I'm there with you in solid
still hurts.
solidarity.
Still hurts. Yeah. Uh, yeah. So I guess this is where we actually find out what's going on with the scone. What's going on with the scone? So yeah, the whole D plot, like D and the King and stuff. Again on the reread, because I know, I guess at least vaguely sort of had a good recollection of what was coming on that front. Uh, I definitely appreciate it more this time. So the thing I was kind of holding off talking about earlier, I guess, was that I find this really unsatisfying the first time I read it. Is like they're looking for this ancient stone scone. First of all, because it's been nicked, right? First of all, it hasn't been nicked, and it's not an ancient stone thing. It's like it's just a piece of plaster, and it was always just a piece of plaster, and actually it doesn't matter. And I was just being like feeling really robbed by that. 'Cause I didn't get at all what he was trying to say.
Yeah,
But now
but now that you're older, you absolutely get it, and it
yeah.
makes the Low King and Albrecht much more interesting kind of characters for having that outlook on it, and it's like our own royalty thing, there's no actual, they're just oddly fucking alien human beings, but their power is just as a figurehead, a symbol, as much as it is a poster of a footballer on our wall.
Hmm.
There's nothing more to it than that. But that's kind of the point. That's the power of it.
Yeah, that's not to dismiss it at all. I mean, that still is important, for the kind of cultural glue that holds together a society. And it's just like actually only really occurred to me as we were speaking about the dwarves, because I remember being like, as I say, a bit turned off by all the kind of the new lore about dwarves in this, because he is kind of retconning a little bit what we know about dwarves already, what we've learned about dwarves through Carrot. And he sort of makes this distinction between copperhead dwarves and Uberwald dwarves, and Carrot's a copperhead dwarf, I guess. So that's why this is the first time we're learning about all these guys who don't let sunlight touch their skin and all this kind of stuff. And just thinking about that now in context of like the time that this book was written, which was a year or two out from 9/11. Yeah, there's obviously kind of sectarian connotations here. We could look at our own situation in Northern Ireland, but I think probably at this time in the late 90s, early 2000s, obviously the conflict between Sunni and Shia Muslims, I guess, in the Middle East was perhaps more in the spotlight, and the way some of the dwarfs dress in terms of what basically sounds like in the cab, there's potential allusions to that there, I suppose. So but reading it now in the context of like we've been, I feel like we in the West are much more aware of that stuff now than we were in 1999. But Terry Pratchett, as always, is his kind of finger on the pulse
Yeah.
of world events for sure.
And I think that's not just, I mean, to be fair in his writing in his book, that sort of differences regionally isn't just something with the dwarfs. We see that with the trolls reflected as well. Um, and it's either hinted at or explicit with the vampires and the werewolves too.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and it's totally legitimate. Like it makes total sense. So yeah, it's probably a bit uncharitable to say that it's a retcon, but it's new. It's completely new information. It's new knowledge that we like everything we knew about dwarves before this isn't relevant to this particular or sect's not even the right word. Yes, culture of dwarves.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that yeah, it's definitely much more satisfying. It's much more satisfying ending to me now as well, and definitely like the whole revelation with Dee and like and why she did it is like that really hits home now. That's like feels so prescient and so heartbreaking and so well observed that that makes it all completely worthwhile. Like because the motivations are so credible and so believable and so relatable that it makes it all come together really, really nicely, I think.
I felt perhaps Dee wasn't particularly centrally lit for being one of the masterminds behind this. Um, but it does give a whole new, so in making Dee a female,
Mm,
it gives a whole new dimension, and that I mean the stuff between Dee and Cherry is really nice. It's
yeah.
really well considered and compassionate writing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I get it that yeah, I mean, Dee has more scenes than Albrecht has, and and is also quite a key component of that little midsection where Vimes just goes to meet all the suspects. Like Dee's very kind of like they spend more time with Dee than they do with the king. So
Where Vimes goes to meet all the suspects. This is prime veteran Discworld reader stuff.
yeah,
To meet all the state officials, not the
yeah,
suspects.
yeah. We know what Vimes is
You
thinking.
can
Like
tell he's been
yeah,
around the block a few times. He's
exactly.
thinking like Vimes.
So I don't disagree, but I think we get just enough of Dee for it to be credible. But yeah, I think you could be counting pages going, yeah, if you dropped a scene, it wouldn't work at all, or if you added one more scene, it might become too obvious. So it's a hard balancing act. Like I get that. So
Yeah, I don't
uh,
feel in the slightest niggly about it.
yeah, but just that idea, and you see it all the time, like right wing politicians who are like ridiculously homophobic who then get caught, on like on Grinder or whatever. Like it's the fanatics in these situations. That level of hatred tends to start internally, I guess. And again, maybe just I feel like that those conversations or that's something that we kind of see discussed more kind of in politics now than we would have done in 1999 or 2000. So again, that feels really prescient, really ahead of its time, and especially because it's around a gender-based issue as well.
Yes, Sybil comes into her own a bit here with the negotiation scene on the prices, which I found was fun. The pregnancy, as I said, was um, yeah, genuinely quite surprising because I think I am used to thinking of Vimes as a man that's coming up on retirement age. Um, and Sybil similarly, that she's um, an elder lady. Uh,
Yeah,
but I mean, I can easily sort of I don't know if it's explicitly been put like that to me, but I can easily sort of wind back and sort of pare them down to sort of in their 40s or
yeah, I think that's probably they might even yeah for possibly even late 40s at this stage. I think
yeah.
there's a bit of there is a slight hand wave going on here, but I think Sybil kind of hangs the lantern on it at one stage where she says, my family we're bred for breeding. We have good breeding. Like that's what we do. That's what we're for. So kind of hanging a lantern on it that way. But yeah, but like there are older parents, and that doesn't go unremarked upon. As that storyline develops. And then of course, the bad guy is never really dead, especially if it's a monster. So the final showdown with Wolfgang's great, and I feel like it's maybe been a little while since we've had Terry do a bit of body horror, and the fact that Wolfgang can't hold his shape. He's like a little bit wolf and a little bit man,
Yeah.
really really vividly described. This is the sort of thing that's really really hard to do actually in other mediums. It's hard to do something like that on screen and make it look compelling. So I think
So that was used really well earlier in the book when they have Vimes captured and he's up a tree and he's tricking them into sort of coming up after him,
yeah, yeah,
taking advantage of that sort of weakened state in human shape. I'm trying to remember how the finale plays out between Vines and Wolves. I know I was going to say a rocket launcher, more like a
yeah.
firework
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah. So Wolfgang comes, attacks him in the embassy. Then Vimes is because then the embassy is technically Ankh-Morpork, which is Vimes' jurisdiction. So that allows him to go in hot pursuit of Wolfgang as a suspect out into the town, where yeah, he's got the fireworks, which are the flares that the Clacks guys use to signal a fault. So when he fires the firework, and this is really well set up with all the stuff with Wolfgang's dad. When he fires the firework, Wolfgang jumps up to catch it in his mouth like a dog, and
Yeah.
then it blows his head off. Yeah, so that I love that when you've got like a run, and again, this is something that Terry is just the master at, where you have like something that seems like it's just a running gag, it's just a joke, and then it has a kind of plot significance at a key moment. There definitely are other examples, but this is a good one, and it's a fitting grisly end for such a good antagonist as Wolfgang.
Not to sugarcoat Terry, but it seems like I mean like he's killing the bad guy quite finally, quite horribly, which is a, seems to me at this point a bit uncommon from the way he deals with that. I mean, it's certainly I like a bit of barbarity and yeah, I'm all for kill the bad guy, but it it seems to be something that Discworld has kind of stepped around or handled in a different way a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that sort of speaks to the slightly darker tone of this one, and the slight move towards maybe a more mature kind of style. And then, yes, okay, that doesn't mean you have to have heads exploding left, right, and center, but like, I feel this one feels earned, like Wolfgang has been such a relentless monster throughout this whole book that like if Vimes is gonna blow anybody's head off, it's got to be this guy, you know. And then I can't remember is it Captain Tantony or somebody like they then kind of retell the incident in like in police language or like oh yeah there was no way for you to know. It's like oh this is basically like they spell out to each other like how they would justify it as cops, you know, like there's no way, you know, you're in pursuit of the suspect. There was no way for you to know that his canine instincts would have made him jump up and catch it, and you kind of go,
That's a nice touch.
they get this, like, but you're right, but it's definitely like it's a step outside of, I guess, like that he straight up murdered that guy, like he did, like Vimes murdered him, but I think that's something that he has to then sort of grapple with, you know.
And that's something I didn't mention earlier about Tony that I really appreciate is that Terry really captures that fraternity among cops. Well, I mean, we have a lot of police media, police procedural crime dramas. A lot of them are really quite good in terms of the mystery and the story, but I don't see that sort of looking after one another as cops. It sort of it goes beyond the cynical kind of thing that there is actually a that hidden language of that almost telepathic language between coppers and other trades people or other servants of a certain type.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
Harry just gets that really well.
yeah, like yeah, it's so like all the kind of professions are so well observed. Like even the one that he invented, like the Clacks guys, like that feels totally real, I believe. Even though we didn't meet them, just from like having a few scenes in their space, I believe that that job exists and those guys are real. And it's yeah, it's the same for the cops. It's the same for pretty much everybody. Like it's more about, I think, he's just such a good observer of human nature, and like and kind of people are people whatever jobs they do to an extent, but they just they fill that shape slightly differently, and he just recognizes it straight away.
I've known a few communities of cops in my time, and there's like a close family kind of thing there that they feel they're like family to one another's families. They like a partner might feel like an uncle to another cop's child.
Mm,
It's a very familial um profession in the off hours.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I guess their experiences are. No, I guess I would always say that nobody who doesn't do it kind of understands what it's like. So that's kind of how it ends up like that, doesn't it?
And now
Yeah,
they're
we got
going to raise Igor in the profession.
yes, indeed, and I love that the
Did
new
I?
one, the new Igor that comes is like the modern one. He's like he forgets to lisp sometimes and stuff.
There's little shades of Mort in this,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and you can just sort of see. I don't.
but also this weird sort of gross kind of like a Ponder Stibbons kind of Igor with a mice with ears growing. Like what that's
Yeah,
messed up, kid.
that's a great comparison, actually. Yeah, that's a really good shout out. And I would have happily continued going through the rest of my life without remembering about that experiment with the mouse and the ear, like that. I didn't need to be reminded about that. But yeah, it's a great introduction. And actually, thinking of that, so I mean, it's not any kind of spoiler to say. Obviously, Igor does go back, and he is in the watch, and he's going to recur as a character. And I wonder, was the whole business with the strike a way to sort of reset things a little bit in the watch? I wonder. I can't. I'm not, this isn't a spoiler because I genuinely can't remember one way or the other,
Okay.
like what the kind of cast of characters is going to be the next time we see the watch. So maybe he was just leaving himself open to the possibility that he can kind of he can take or leave. He can rejig that any way he chooses because at the end of this book, like they've all kind of left essentially. And yes, Carrot has told them to go get them back, but we don't actually see who officially comes back. I think who's still there? Dorfel is still there, and
Dorfel. Yeah.
Visit is maybe still there,
Yeah.
or yeah, I think that's kind of it. So beyond that, he's kind of left himself with the possibility to have whoever he wants, basically, in the watch next time around.
Be
And I
a
can't.
new Avengers or a new X-Men. If you know the answer to PJ's queries, don't post it in the comments. Keep it
Yeah,
spoiler free.
yeah. I mean, I have to pick up my copy of Night Watch and check, I suppose, but I'll resist. I think Night Watch is the next Guards book, isn't it?
Uh,
You resist? You're not resisting looking at titles or anything, are you?
no, I've actually started the next book. I'm not very far in, so there is a guard scene kicking off that.
Oh yeah, okay.
Um, and yeah, I was playing a little game with myself that can I remember the name of all the books I've read so far in chronological order. I've done pretty well, I think. I can do halfway there with no problem.
I don't even think I could do that, and I'm like rereading most of these. uh, why is this? What is the next book actually? Since
The
we're
next
kind of
book
there.
is called The Truth.
Oh yeah. Oh man, love this one. Which is odd, right? Because we'll talk about it when we talk about it. But we're in that space now where like we have the Clacks, and obviously the truth is about newspapers, uh, and the
Yeah.
industrialization of Discworld is in full swing. But it, yeah, I don't know. It just this one just hit me at the wrong time. Like I totally bounced off this kind of first go at that, like the first go at making a slightly more serious, slightly more industrialized version of Discworld. But then the next one, I loved. Like I loved the truth at the
I've
time.
been, it's been hinted to me for a while. I've been really looking forward to it, given the subject matter. So I
Yeah,
think we'll have plenty to discuss. I mean, I've been through the whole sort of media studies thing as a like training for journalism.
yeah,
I've done an awful lot of that in the blog um, format. So yeah, I'm really keen, and of course, content analysis and stuff. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, this I'm looking forward to getting back into this. Sounds like you're enjoying it already. So with that in mind, any kind of final thoughts,
Final
quotes, or
thoughts.
anything for this one?
I've no quotes picked out, but I did enjoy it was Lady Margalota's one about vampires. Beware of reformed vampires. The the although I felt it went nowhere, the colon stuff was quite fun, and the interplay with Nobby, who yeah made it worse, and I suppose I should seen that coming, but I've always been relatively kind towards colon, it strikes me now. And yeah, what a plonker.
Yeah, he does. He blows because I mean he made Colon he kind of the mouthpiece for a lot of the racism in Jingo, and now he's kind of made him the. I think he actually literally somebody calls him a class traitor. I think at one point.
I
Uh,
love the insanity that it is Nobby who's leading the Marxist socialist
yeah. Oh
rebellion.
no, sorry. Actually, no. Lady Margalotta tells Vimes that maybe Vimes thinks he's a class traitor, but there's obviously an implication there with what's going on back in the city. But yeah, the idea of yeah, Colon kind of being the scab and Nobby leading the strikers is endlessly funny.
That's
Um,
another thing I was going to pick up on was Lady Margalotta and Vimes towards the end, where Vimes sort of ventures the theory that she had trained veterinary, which was quite interesting. Of course, she denies that, and the fanboy in me can't help thinking, well, did veterinary train her?
yeah, indeed,
Uh,
yeah.
and yeah, that's my head canon at the moment until shown otherwise. Um, there was a lot of great stuff. I'm really glad you had a lot to say about it because I feel I didn't quite have the cognitive nice to do so.
It is quite dense. I think it's
Yeah.
like there's so much going on. There's so much world building, some quite complex character journeys, especially I think for Angua. And yeah, there's just a lot of really well drawn, but therefore quite sometimes overwhelming world building, I think, going on, and the story kind of depends on it.
I didn't quite love it as much as I did Carpe Juggling, but it's a very strong um, follow-up. Very
Yeah,
strong indeed. Yeah.
definitely one that's worthy of a couple of readings. I think I'm really glad I did it. I a couple of quotes. Yeah, you can knock on either side of the door. We talked about that already. It's a great line. But page 127 or thereabouts. Maybe it's Gaspode and Carrot actually. Yeah, are talking about discussing the difference between dogs and wolves. Yeah, and Gaspard ventures the opinion that dogs are a lot nastier than wolves, and I think that says a lot about how Terry Pratchett sees the world. And I know I always pick these kind of quotes that highlight this, but I always find them kind of reassuring in some ways that like that he gets it. Uh, and obviously the reason for that the dogs are nastier than wolves is because dogs have been influenced by people, you know. So wolves are of nature, but dogs are of society, and dogs are nastier than wolves because society is nastier inherently than nature is. And I think that kind of sums up a lot of what he has to say about the world through these stories. I think that was definitely a lot of what he was saying in Carpe Jugulum as well as in this book. So yeah, I like finding the line that kind of sums up the theme or sums up a theme. That's always fun. And then there's just a really good piece of description. I think with the first time Vimes catches Wolfgang in like all his terrifying glory, which is that the blonde hair across his shoulders gleamed like a slipped halo. Well, that was quite good, especially considering the nature of that character. You know, like he's basically a devil, like a fallen angel, and yeah, his halo has slipped down onto his shoulders. I thought that was really cool, really nice turn of phrase. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I think despite the fact that it's maybe a bit of a longer read and it is quite dense, just the level of craft on display is still extremely high in this book.
I'm seeing
Where,
a couple, and I mean the first one's a bit pithy. It's a bit of a sort of that thing that one gender or another will do, where they'll diss the other, and this is quite a nice rebuttal to the idea that guys can't multitask. Sexist crap. Sam
oh
Vimes could parallel process. Most
yeah,
husbands can. They learn to follow their own line of thought while at the same time listening to what their wives say. And the listening is important because at any time they can be challenged and must be ready to quote the last sentence in full. A vital additional skill is being able to scan the dialogue for telltale phrases, such as, and they can deliver it tomorrow, or so I've invited them for dinner, or they can do it in blue, really quite cheaply. Um,
no comment.
it's okay for a single guy to come up. Uh, the other one was another Vimesism that I quite adhere to somewhat on probably on justice. He was aware that a wise man should always respect the folk ways of others, to use Carrot's happy phrase, but Vimes often had difficulty with this idea. For one thing, there were people in the world whose folkways consisted of gutting other people like clams, and this was not a procedure that commanded, in Vimes, any respect at all.
Yeah, that's totally fair, and I think sums up as well a lot of kind of obviously Terry's kind of worldview, and yeah, put given that the Vimes, especially in the context of this book, I think is quite powerful. Yeah, especially considering what the ultimate reveal is. You know, it's the dwarfs' traditions that have got them into this and that have got people killed essentially, and that he's kind of summed up why that's not to be respected just because something exists and it's old. Uh, cool. Yeah, I really was dragging my feet a wee bit on that read. I wasn't sure how much I was gonna get out of that one, but yeah, that's the real benefit of doing this is just getting to revisit ones that I just wasn't ready for it or just didn't quite hit me right at the time and just being able to give them a second chance. So hopefully now that doesn't mean that I'm gonna have the opposite reaction to the truth because I did really love that the first time I read it. So yeah, gonna get stuck back into that very soon.
I'm excited about it. Yeah.
Good.
So a few thank yous. Thanks to our friends at the Pratt Chat podcast who are always going out and batting for us. So give Ben and Elizabeth a listen to, check out their
Indeed. Yep.
stuff. Um, Thank you to my top patrons, Arslan Hyder Ali, Art K, Ian Lawther for his patronage as well and giving us the Zoom Tech Pro to do this on.
Indeed.
I'm winding up for reasons of accounts resting in my funds. I'm
Hmm.
winding up my Patreon for the summer. However, there will still be exclusive content on that, including first listen to this podcast. So you can go on and sign up at patreon.com/Andy Luke. Sign up on a money tier, and that way you get everything. And I promise you will not pay anything until at the very earliest, the 1st of July, and you get plenty of warning before that happens. It might even be much longer. Um, so yeah, at the moment I'm doing my Doctor Who dumpster floor series on YouTube. There's the remains of one of the props for our YouTube audience,
It's
which
high
is
production value, folks. I can tell you, very, very
yes.
high.
Um, it's kind of like a cross between an in-depth researchology documentary and a series of comedy sketches. Um, and if you don't care about Doctor Who, but you're not averse to finding out in non-boring, non-geek detail as to what happens, then it's also perfectly produced for the first timer to jump in and jump out of. Optimism is the key. So,
Awesome.
yep.
Cool. I don't really have much to promote at the minute. I think you can still hear the Devil's Own on BBC Sound somewhere. Bumped into John actually during the week at the BBC Comedy Festival. After a few beers, we were like, yeah, we need to find some more weird stuff to make another radio documentary about. So if you got any ideas for something that we should do that on, do write in and tell us.
I
And
don't know if I should say this. PJ can tell me off and edit it out if not, but Devil's Own is also carried outside the UK on a number of podcast feeds.
oh yeah, no, let her rip. I didn't actually know
Yeah, if you can't get into
that.
iPlayer or BBC Sounds, then you can access it there.
Good to know. Yeah, so it'd be nice. Hopefully, we'll see. Yeah, it'd be nice to have some more projects to plug. But yeah, watch the space.
Have you
And
still on iPlayer for a short while?
oh yes,
If you're bored with both of those, check out PJ's short film Help with Owen Cleland.
it is a 360-degree viewing experience. It was a bit of an experimental short film. So if you have a VR headset, you can watch it on that on directly on YouTube. If not, you can kind of watch it with a phone and tablet and like move it around. And it's yeah,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, Dave.
it's an interesting experiment. I yeah. So if you're into that sort of thing, it's only 10 minutes. That's probably it. What else have you got going on? Andy's got a few
Um,
books to plug another time.
yeah, yeah.
Usually I have my copy sitting somewhere to hold up. I don't at the minute.
So yeah, got another time. Pro-choice political activism journey novel by my late friend Holly Miles, edited by myself and a number of Holly's other friends. The first of a three-book series. It's got a young adult kind of bent to it. Coastlines After Dark, which is utterly bonkers. Uh,
Yes, it
Probably the
is.
funniest thing I've written, actually. It's certainly the one that I had the most fun writing. If I've ever made you laugh, this is kind of the book for you. Coastlines After Dark.
It's good fun. And are you still doing press gang or
Press Gang readers' commentaries are got halfway through episode series two. I plan to leave them until after the summer. I probably will get. I'm having thoughts about whether to continue doing my other YouTube stuff.
yeah,
So
fair.
this world's safe, Sunny's safe, but we'll see. And I kind of there's a lot of press gang commentary projects that kind of end up stopping prematurely at the end of series two, and I'm determined that doesn't happen to me. But it is an awful lot of work I put into those. So
No, for sure. But if
yeah,
you're at all into
I'm
yeah, the early work of Stephen Moffat, you should definitely check that out.
100%.
Uh,
Yeah.
absolutely. All right, cool, man.
Many of particularly American audience, a hidden, an absolute hidden gem.
Oh, completely. Yeah, very, very formative piece of UK TV. So awesome. Yeah, I'm looking for I'm off camping for a few days. It's really rainy here in Ireland as usual. So I'll probably hopefully get a chance to just sit and listen to the rain on the tent and maybe read some Discworld. That would be probably the best way to salvage that situation. So I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, so we'll can hear us again very soon where we'll be discussing the truth.
The truth. Yep. So we have read some Discworld.
Indeed, we have. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, never a chore.
Goodbye.